Okay, today's topic is Edgestash, and it is a content rendering feature we have in Varnish Plus. So to be completely honest, today's webinar is going to be quite educational in the sense that it's divided into two different parts. The first one, in the first half, we are going to discuss why edge computing is becoming so important, because we need to have some context, and I personally think it's also a very, very interesting topic. In the second half, we're going through Edgestash and how it works, what it does, why it is important, and there is also going to be not really a live demo, but a proper demonstration, so high chances internet connection will break at that point. But hopefully not. Okay, a little bit of introduction. I'm pretty sure most of you already know who I am, but for those who don't know who I am, my name is Arianna. I'm Italian, currently living in Italy, and I've been working together with Varnish software for the last 3.5 years. I am a technical evangelist at the moment, but I've changed position within the company. So previously I've worked as field engineer, which basically means I've been, and I still am, in touch with a lot of customers, prospects, Varnish Cache users. So I do develop some of the features as well. So I'm deeply involved into this kind of technology. Whenever I'm not working, I love traveling and sports. So that's pretty much what I do when I have some free time. Again, a little bit of introduction. So now you know who is talking. Next step is to introduce Varnish Software as company, and we are the company behind the famous open source web accelerator Varnish Cache. And I'm sure most of you have heard about Varnish Cache because it powers up to 2.5 million websites out there. We, as a company, develops community software, we support it, but we also develop a very enhanced version of Varnish Cache, and that's Varnish Plus. It is more feature complete, and it provides concrete solution to real problems out there. We also have other offers, such as Varnish Extend, which is an offer for everyone interested in do-it-yourself or private and hybrid CDNs, and the Varnish API engine, which is an API accelerator. Today, since we're talking about Edgestash, Edgestash is a Varnish module, which is a Varnish extension, and we are going to stay focused on Varnish Plus. So usually, when we talk about Varnish Plus or Varnish, we describe it as a reverse-side HTTP caching reverse proxy, and we want to highlight that it has a programming language called VCL, which stands for Varnish Configuration Language, and you can use it to define your own caching policies. That's one of the most powerful tools we have in VCL because it basically allows you to do anything you want to achieve. It gives you a lot of flexibility, and at the same time, Varnish also reduced significantly the strain on your backends. Why this? So that's how we usually explain what Varnish does. We say we have a client, we have a backend, and we have Varnish sitting in between. So a client comes in and sends a request for a specific page, anything. The first time this request will be generated in the web server. So we are basically at this layer. So client number 1 will be served by the backend. And this will take something like 150 milliseconds time to first byte. All the other incoming clients requesting the same resource will be served directly from cache. And this will reduce time to first byte to 30 microseconds. So when we usually talk about Varnish, we tend to highlight that caching is important when it comes to performance, speed, and reliability. But again, like in real world, architectures are way more complicated than this. most likely you're not going to have a single client, but most likely you will have thousands of concurrent clients requesting different type of resources. And you won't have a single backend, but you will have at least 2, 3, up till hundreds of backends. And again, you won't have a single Varnish instance in place, because you want to make sure you're always available, you can always be reached, and you can always serve content in the best possible way to your final user. So you will have at least a couple of Varnish nodes in place. So if one of those two needs to be switched off for maintenance or any other issue, you still have the second one which can fulfill incoming requests. Most likely, again, you're not going to have just a couple of layers, but your architecture can be way more complicated. So now we need to go through some of the recent history, and we're really talking about the last, possibly, I would say 5 years, but to be honest, I think the technology has developed quite well only during the last couple of years, and we really talk about the cloud. So first it was the cloud. Why this? So that's more or less the typical cloud architecture. As you can see, it's quite centralized, meaning that we have big cloud storage in important location, and then we have other points of presence distributed a little bit over the world. And each of those locations most likely will have possibly a caching layer, other backends, and other nodes, anything you want to do. Like, it's really not a single layer. So keep in mind again that we have very complicated architectures nowadays, and we have, like, the cloud is really taking over. So we really want to have a storage cloud somewhere in a strategic position, and then we want to have points of presence all over the world. And that's true for basically most of the websites out there, I will say, because the audience is really coming from all over the world, and it's really not just websites don't really serve a single location anymore, but they tend to serve different type of location and different type of audience. So how does the cloud really works? We have, again, a big centralized storage, and then we have points of presence in few locations, and they usually have quite big servers because they act like caching layers, or they can also act as web storage or as web service as well. And they need to serve content to the end users, which are distributed in a lot of different locations. So up till possibly, I would say, last year, the cloud was really the solution, the way to work. Like, we had no problem at all with cloud architecture. So now, where is the problem with the cloud nowadays? It's always performance. So as usual, performance actually drives innovation. But why is it performance? In the last year or so, we have seen the rise of technologies such as artificial intelligence or Internet of Things, or just think about what Apple is doing, or again, think about Tesla. Tesla is a very good example, because Tesla really need to be performant, because Tesla sends as a lot of GET and that requests going back and forth from each machine to the closest Tesla points of presence, simply because, as you most likely know, those machines are driverless, and they really need to keep exchanging data with other servers in order to make sure that you within that car are not going to crash. And this has to be absolutely performance and perfect. So performance, again, it's a big issue, and it's not an issue only for industry or for companies such as Tesla, but it's actually an issue for everyone else, because nowadays we really want to have a lot of user personalization. We want to make sure our end users are happy with what we deliver, and And we also want to monitor and collect data from those users in order to provide the best experience ever. And obviously this means that we have a lot of data to be shuffled back and forth. We have a lot of logic to be run, and infrastructure doesn't really change, or it's not as easy to change the infrastructure, but it's easier to change the software which is run on that specific infrastructure. And that's when the edge came in, actually. So remember, we are moving from a cloud architecture to the edge architecture. Why this? The solution is easy. Since we can't really change the infrastructure, we simply move the whole logic closer to the end user. So we have less latency, better performance overall, ability to do more user personalization, and keep this in mind, less round trips and bandwidth. Those two last points are extremely important for when it comes to mobile connections. And since mobile connections are actually growing quite fast, and they will probably overcome desktop connection by 2020, those two last points are extremely important to keep in mind. So the idea again is super simple. We simply move the whole logic from a centralized architecture to a way more distributed architecture. So as before, like, the cloud is not disappearing. We still have cloud storages in specific and strategic part of the world, but then we will have way more little service distributed all over the world in order to make sure we can reach any kind of audience and be sure that every single user out there has the same type of performance as everyone else. So now it's actually quite easy to understand why the industry is moving towards this edge computing. I personally think there is, like, the best solution nowadays is to combine cloud computing and edge computing, because there are some algorithms which can be run in a cloud scenario, and some logic which can be run and must be run at the very edge of your architecture to make sure you reduce the latency and you are as much responsive as possible. So that's where Edgestash kicks in. So Edgestash is a Varnish Plus feature. Again, that's a vmod, which basically means that you don't have to worry about anything. There is a wonderful API, fully accessible from VCL, and you will have to write more or less, I think, 7 or possibly less lines of VCL. We'll see that later because I have a slide about it. And Edgestash, that's how the Reza Nagibi, colleague of mine and the original developer of Edgestash, described Edgestash. He says it is a network-based content rendering. I usually describe it as a module that allows you to do content rendering at the edge of your architecture within your cache. And I believe that's extremely important to highlight in this scenario. Okay, so now it's all clear. We know why we are at the edge, but let's try to stay focused. And why do I need Edgestash? Why is that important for me? Again, that's a problem. If you don't understand what's this image, I'll just explain it. So the problem is always the same. We have a lot of logic. Websites are not just plain HTML. Most likely, each website is made up of JavaScript library, different images, JSON files to be fetched here and there, other cookies to be fetched from any other website. So for you, in order to be able to receive a web page, your web browser will take a few round trips before it's actually capable to render it properly and just return it to you as user. So that's a problem. It takes a lot of time. It takes bandwidth. It takes round trips. it requires logic. So overall, it's quite complicated to render a web page nowadays. And it obviously slows down the whole process and makes your end user unhappy of the performance you can provide. Just to give you an example, that's how it works without Edgestash. So the client sends a request for a page, needs to send a request for a page template, and the client's server replies back, and you will receive some content and the template of the page. Now the client, which is the web browser in this scenario, will have to send another request to the server asking for a JavaScript library. Server will reply back. Now the client has also the JavaScript library, but without a JSON file, the client or the web browser is not capable to render the page. So the client will have to issue another request before it's completely capable to render the page. As you can see, those are 3 round trips. And it obviously takes time and it consumes bandwidth again. With Edgestash, the clients or the web browser will have to send a single request to the server. The server will pre-render the page for the web browser and will simply reply back with the pre-rendered page. When we first developed Edgestash, actually we have been thinking about that, and the thought around it is that when you have a caching layer at the edge of your architecture, that caching layer most likely will have all the pieces the web browser needs in order to render the page. So why does the web browser need to send 3, 4, 5, 7 different requests to your caching layer before it is capable to render the page? Why can't we render or pre-render the page at the caching layer at the very edge of your architecture and simply reply back? That's what we have been thinking about when we first developed Edgestash. And again, as you can see, we reduced the number of round trips, we reduced the consumed bandwidth, and think about mobile connection. Bandwidth is still quite expensive nowadays, and mobile connection is really not the best we have seen so far, I will say. So we really need to have a caching layer with Edgestash where you can pre-assemble everything at the edge. Okay, so now you might think, yeah, that's wonderful, but what is Edgestash exactly? What does it do? So Edgestash is based on a Mustache template, and actually all you need, and this will have to come from your backends because Varnish is 100% capable to pre-render your page, but obviously the content needs to be generated by your backends. And all you need is an HTML page like this one, which uses a Mustache syntax, JSON file, which can obviously be generated by your backends, and then you will get a result. Let me explain this. So the HTML page, this one says, welcome back, and then the Mustache syntax starts. And in this specific case, it says, if there is a logged field within the JSON file I've provided you, then go and check if we also have a name field in there. And obviously, if it exists, use that name. In the JSON data we actually have a logged field over here, and the subfield, we also have a name subfield over here. And the key for this field is Paul. So the result you will get is welcome back, Paul. That's pretty straightforward. I'm not going through the all Mustache syntax simply because it's very well documented on our website, and I believe it's not extremely fundamental for today's webinar because it's more important to understand the whole technology and logic behind Edgestash and how powerful it is. So we're actually moving forward, and I'll explain you how to use this through VCL. So as I've mentioned at the very beginning, Edgestash is a Varnish module, and it provides an API which is accessible from VCL, from your VCL file, your Varnish configuration language file, and you don't really have to worry about anything. Like, that's a very simple example. And if you're a little bit familiar with Varnish, I will explain this and try to see if you understand what's going on. If not, please do ask questions and I will reply to those at the end of the webinar. So in VCL backend response, and that's a subroutine which is run when a new object is actually inserted in cache. So that's right after a backend fetch, the new object is being inserted in cache and Varnish runs this VCL backend response. So if the content type is JSON, then Edgestash will index JSON to make the research easier and obviously more performant. That's not mandatory, but we usually suggest to use this subroutine. Otherwise, if the content type is text, we want to parse the response. Why do we want to parse the response? Simply because Varnish needs to understand what's in there, and it needs to make sure that the response is actually makes sense, and it needs to make sure that if there are other moving pieces in that response or not. So now we have received a new object, and it's either a JSON object or a text object. When we deliver the response to the final user, we first make sure that the templating is actually it's an Edgestash templating, and if it is, we simply execute it. So why don't you have to worry about anything? Because at this point, you can have the object can be already in cache, and Varnish will make sure to assemble the pre-rendered page. But if for any reason there is a JSON data which is lacking from the cache, Edgestash itself will make sure to trigger a backend request and insert the new object in cache. So you really don't have to put any logic in it. All you have to let Varnish know is that you have an Edgestash template somewhere, and you have a JSON file, and that Varnish will have to execute Edgestash using that specific JSON file. That's it. Any other lacking piece in there will simply be resolved by Varnish. So really, that's super straightforward. Like now I have, again, it's really not a demo, but I want to show you we have a nice website we made for this Edgestash demo. And so that's a website, again, but we have actually a very complete documentation, and that's in docs.varnishsoftware.com. And if you browse around, you will get to this Edgestash. So the reason why I haven't gone through the syntax, it's because it's completely documented here, and that's and it's very well documented. The same is for the API for the vmod, like all the available subroutines or all the available functions, sorry, are well described in this documentation. Okay, let's go back to the demo. We have 4, 5 different demos. Let's try. I'm going to explain the first one. This demo website is available for everyone, so you can actually have a look at it and play with it. And if you have other questions, you can drop me a question like right now, or possibly also later through email. I will give you my contacts at the end of the presentation. But let's go back to the demo, device optimization. Okay, device optimization. And here we are again to user personalization. So we really want to make sure that if you're running on, if you're requesting a page from mobile, you will see the mobile page. If it's from desktop, you will have a different result. I am from desktop this time. So yes, you are on desktop device. You should see a red Edgestash logo above. Yes, I am. Okay. Again, as I told you, we need HTML, we need the JSON file, and we need VCL. Let's go through this HTML, which is generated by our backend. So HTML file. Okay, there is the body, there is a class logo, and if mobile exists, so if the mobile field within the JSON file exists, then use this Edgestash small blue logo, and that's the Edgestash mobile. If it doesn't exist, then use the red one, the Edgestash large. The same for the paragraph. If mobile exists within the JSON file, then you have to write you are on a blue mobile device, and you should see a mobile optimized blue Edgestash logo above. Otherwise, if a mobile field doesn't exist within that specific JSON file, then you gotta write you are on a red desktop. You are on a desktop device. You should see a red Edgestash logo above. So as you can see, HTML is super straightforward. There is really no magic in here. It's just conditional scenarios. So if something exists, then do this. If it doesn't exist, do something else. Perfect. That's a JSON file which is used by this HTML page. And in this scenario, obviously mobile is equal to false because we are on desktop. And the third piece you need is VCL. So we do import Edgestash because that's a vmod. And VCL receive is the first subroutine which a request encounters when it goes through Varnish. And in this first subroutine, we check if the user agent matches mobile or iPhone or Android. We set a xMobile header equal to true. Otherwise, we set the xMobile header equal to false. Since we are on desktop, our xMobile header will be equal to false. So now we are in VCL receive. Varnish handles the request, and the request go to the backend. And when the backend replies back in VCL backend response, we parse the response, and we try to make sure parsing the response means that we actually go through this HTML and this HTML response, and we make sure it's Edgestash and everything is properly organized. In VCL deliver, which is the subroutine which will reply back to the end user, we execute Edgestash. And to do so, we give to this function a parameter, a JSON parameter. And here we actually creating the JSON file. So if you have a look at this, that's this JSON file, over here. So we say mobile equal, and then we do a concatenation using the xMobile header. And if you do remember, our xMobile header was equal to false, meaning that Edgestash will execute Edgestash and the mustachio templating using a JSON file equal to mobile equal to false, and everything should be in place. So this was like the easiest example. We can switch to mobile, and we can force it to, like, I'm still on desktop, but we can actually force it to run on mobile. And that's a very simple example of user personalization. So we have 3-4 other examples. You are very much welcome to have a look at those and to ask questions. So how does Edgestash work? It's part of the Varnish Plus solution. It's a vmod. So you only have to install Varnish Plus, and you will have access to it, and you can test it, and you can definitely report back to us if you can report back to us. So what's next? The roadmap is actually chosen by you. We personally believe that Edgestash is a very, very nice feature to have nowadays, and therefore we are very much open to talk to users, prospects, customer, anyone using Edgestash. We don't really have a strict roadmap. My colleague Reza it tends to be always at the top of things, so he knows what's going on, and I know he has a personal roadmap, but he's also very, very curious to know what you think about the feature and how we can improve it. So I really, really encourage you to reach out to me or to anyone else at Varnish Software in order to either try Edgestash or also simply report back what you think about it, and if you have any specific requests. So now, if you have any question, I will be more than happy to answer to those. Let me just go back to this one. So in the chat, I can't see anything. I can't see questions either. Is this all clear? Ok. Hello, Arianna. Grazie per questo webinar, which means thank you for this webinar. Basically, how do I implement Edgestash on a CMS such as Drupal? I understand that I have to write a brand new theme with dedicated area, for instance, to render personalized content whenever a session is open. Yeah, that's correct. So yes, there is some work to be done from a backend point of view. You will actually have to define a brand new theme for dedicated areas. Varnish is capable to pre-render the page, but obviously the content needs to be your web server needs to originate the content, and that's where it is created. So yes, you will have to put some more logic in that. It does require some backend work, but some of our, like, if you already use ESI or a similar technology, moving to Mustaches should be quite easy. Like, I don't really know your website. I don't know how much how much ESI you have in there, or even if you have ESI in place. But if you have a technology similar to Edgestash include, moving to Mustaches should be fine. Okay, so there is another question. Do you have any plan to integrate with the Akamai connector? Okay, I believe that's slightly. Let me see if I get this properly, because I'm not sure if you want to know if we're going to integrate Edgestash together with the Akamai connector or not. But, like, to be honest, Akamai connector is slightly off topic, but I'm going to reply to this because I think it's important to make sure we are clear. So Akamai connector is a different feature, and you can implement Edgestash and the Akamai connector all together. Edgestash task is to make sure you can pre-render the page at the edge of your architecture. Akamai connector is important for you if you're using Akamai and Varnish and you need to synchronize CDN and cache. So it's slightly different, but it's not one or another. They can work together just fine. Is that similar then to the ESI technology? Yes, it is. The idea behind it is the same. Syntax changes a little bit, as you can see, but the idea is the same. So can we pre-render parts of the page so that if there is dynamic content for a logged in user, they see their personal content? Yes, you can do that. You obviously will need to make sure you are pre-rendering content for a specific user. So once your user logs in, he or she will most likely have a cookie header, and usually the trick is to always check that the cookie header is specific to that user, and track the user throughout his or her experience, and then pre-render content. I'm not sure if I have any VCL doing that. I should probably write some testing, but I think it's possible, to be honest. How will Edgestash work in a scenario where Varnish works basically as an entry point to your data center and the CDN like Akamai as actual caching layer between browser and origin? So, since it's still at the edge of your architecture, I can't really see any problem at all. You only need to make sure that Varnish and Akamai are well synchronized. And here we go back again to the Akamai connector, but that's a different issue. Edgestash really, it doesn't really care of what's happening at other layers. As long as it can find content in cache, or it is capable to trigger backend requests, then it will be able to pre-render the page and serve the content. Really, so it's I can't see any problem with that. So is there any way to define cache TTLs for parts of the final render page, just like assign TTL to ESI parts? Yes. No, let me think about this, because I'll just write this down, because you're not the first one asking this, but I don't remember, to be honest, if we have used a workaround or if we have implemented something that fixes that. So I will actually follow up on this, but I think we have at least a workaround. Excuse me if I can't answer to this straight away. Let me just write this down. What infrastructure do you recommend for a global set of edge servers? That's a very good question. It depends. I don't know which kind of websites you have. It might change based on your requirements and based on the type of region you are serving. I think the most used solution at the moment is to still have a backend in the cloud, or more backends in the cloud, and then make sure to have a lot of points of presence, also using an hybrid or private CDNs. So in terms of infrastructures, I really like easy things. So if you can strip it down to backends and just a few backends or web servers and a few points of presence acting as caching layers, I think that should be it. You need to make sure you have high availability among your caching layers, and that there are a lot of factors to keep into consideration. Also the type of network you have and the bandwidth available you have, and the latency. You need to evaluate the latency, so it's really not that straightforward. But I think nowadays the best solution will be to leave the bare metal and move to the cloud and the edge combined together. Like, it's possibly not time yet to abandon completely the cloud, but it's definitely a good time to abandon bare metal. Wow, there is a lot of other questions. Thank you, you're welcome. So how does Edgestash work with Varnish, high availability, and X-key? High availability and X-key, it's a secondary hashing key for Varnish Plus, and they work just fine. High availability simply make sure that there is consistency among caches and copy one object into different other caching nodes, and X-key adds secondary hashing keys, so I can't see any issue with this. Again, Edgestash will simply pre-render content at the edge, so it's really, unless you're doing some magic with X-key or some strange things over there, I can't really see them with problem at all. I like this one. Are there any plans that Akamai support Edgestash? I have no idea. Like, that's really, really off topic. I work for Varnish Software. I don't know what Akamai has planned for the future, to be honest. You can ask them. But I guess Edgestash is a Varnish Plus feature, is really something Akamai is not developing. Maybe you want to ask them if they want to, they're going to move to the edge and implement some sort of logic at the edge. I don't know. You should ask them. I have no idea. Can Edgestash be used with 3 Varnish instances? Yes, but Edgestash is a Varnish. It is a Varnish modules, and it's a Varnish Plus module. Sorry. So it's you will have to buy a subscription in order to be able to access to the Edgestash module. But then you can use it for Varnish instances as well. It's really up to you. I'm not sure that's a good idea though, because when we develop feature for Varnish Plus, they usually very well tailored on Varnish Plus. They work for Varnish Cache as well, but yeah, I could start and talk for the next 30 minutes on why nowadays Varnish Plus is probably the best fit for a edge architecture than Varnish Cache, but it's really not the topic of the day, so I'm not going to do it. But yes, you can use Edgestash with Varnish instances, 3 Varnish instances if you want to. Okay, I guess that was it. If there are no other questions, I would like to thank you all for your time, for listening to me, and have a lovely day if you're in the US, and a lovely evening if you are in Europe. Thank you very much.